Richard Seppings here from Anglia Car Charging with us today, who's going to give us some information on electric cars and how we charge them. We know there are different types of electric vehicles, but are there different types of charging points?
Yes, I think there's a number of different points. You've got chargers for the home, chargers for the workplace, and you get the big rapid chargers beside the road. And then within those you have different powers, different sizes of charger as well, ranging from at the lowest end you could use a 13 amp plug, which would charge your car very, very slowly, through to some of the, for example, 150 kilowatt chargers beside the roads, which would put hundreds of miles into the car in every hour.
Do all the electric cars have the same plug?
Increasingly, yes. If you went back a couple of years, there was a Type 1 and a Type 2 charger. I guess your question comes from concerns about compatibility, is probably what it is about. And the way it's often overcome is that if a charger on a wall or on a post, wherever it is, you either have chargers which have got an integral cable in them. Now that does mean it has to be dedicated to the Type 1 or Type 2. But if you have just a socket on the charger, then they are always the same. So every car that's bought in the country, the cable that comes with it will have a Type 2 socket which you can connect to.
So how long does it take to charge an electric car?
Oh, that's a
difficult one.
It depends on the charger. You knew I was going to say that, and it depends on the size of the battery in the car.
Yeah.
But if a good rule of thumb, if you're looking at a 32 amp charger, which is, sorry, I'm getting a bit technical, 32 amps, which is a 7 kilowatt charger, which is realistically the biggest charger you could put on a house, and it would typically be the largest single phase charger that would be used in a workplace, for example.
Okay.
If you put a 32 amp charger on, it would give around about 25 miles of range for every hour that it's connected.
Okay.
So an example is my car here has got a nominal 250 odd mile capacity, 250 mile range in the battery. So 25 miles in an hour, so 10 hours you would charge it from empty. Having said that, in 47,000 miles of driving in this, it's very rare that I've ever got to a point of it being empty. And if you look at what someone's average mileage is in a day, it varies of course, but average miles someone does is I think 17 or 20 miles. There's less than an hour's charging typically. So I suppose what I'm saying is it's not a case of every night when you're charging you're going to be charging full blast for 10 hours.
To charge an electric car, would you say?
It's a lot cheaper than petrol or diesel, I'll say that for starters. And I can tell you about this car and my electricity. I pay 16 pence per kilowatt hour for my electricity, and the car does about 4 miles per kilowatt hour. Now, what you have to think of when I start talking about miles per kilowatt hour, people tend to think, what's he on about? You have to think miles per gallon, miles per kilowatt hour. And that's the change you've got to get used to. So a kilowatt hour of electricity is costing me 16 pence and I go 4 miles on it. So that's about 4 pence per mile. That's cheap. I know that if you've got a 45 mile per gallon vehicle, that'll be about 12-14 pence per mile in petrol or diesel.
So it's a significant saving.
So it's a third of the cost, yeah. And then of course you can take it further, because when you're charging at home, there are so many electric vehicle tariffs for your electricity where you can get really cheap electricity at night.
Yeah.
And the trick with that is, so an example would be you'd be paying perhaps 5 pence per kilowatt hour rather than the 15 or 16. So it's 1.5 pence a mile at night. The trick is to, of course, have the right charger which allows you to do that, so it'll decide when to turn the charger on and to optimize the cheap electricity tariffs.
So you can just charge straight from the mains. So So when you pick up your new electric car, you can just plug it straight in the mains, or would it be better to get a charger that's actually installed?
If you if you start with just plugging in with a 13 amp plug, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
You'll be charging very, very slowly, and you might plug it in at night, and the next morning it's still not be full.
Right.
So the thing to do is to. It's also, you're putting quite a heavy strain on the electric, your socket circuit around the house, and so really
Could
the
it
important.
overheat then? Could it over?
No, it shouldn't do. But if you're using if you're using a lot of electricity over a long time, things get warm if you're not careful. So
Yeah.
the trick is really to put in a dedicated supply from your main incomer into the house.
Yeah.
And if you build that in with having a charger where it can optimize the advantages of cheap electricity, then
That would
it's
be the
brilliant.
better
It's
way, more
way
efficient
better.
way.
It's way better, and that cheap electricity at night is something a lot of people either haven't heard about or forget about. But if you do that, your savings are so big.
I think people realise that there are specific companies, electric, companies that are actually offering those kind of incentives where you can.
You need to Google it.
charge-
I mean, there's
charge at night.
many. Octopus is one who I guess lead the pack, but just about all the electricity suppliers now do have EV tariffs, and it's just such an important part of it. And of course, you can take that a step further, and if you go to one of the electricity providers who are doing green tariffs, so you're using renewable energy, then you really are beginning to
That's
get into
true.
the right area.
Can you overcharge a car?
No. When it's full, it turns itself off. I think that's probably the other point about the chargers, is that there's a large element of safety in them, that when you connect a car and a charger, they talk to one another to make sure everything's right before the power actually switches on.
Yeah.
And when it's full, it turns itself off, so no, you can't overcharge it.
And I suppose a big concern for many is range anxiety, especially for those that live in rural areas that feel they might run out. What can you say about that? What's your advice about that?
I never worry about it. It just isn't a feature of my life driving around these days. I think the most important thing to remember is that if you're charging your car at home, you leave every morning when you go out with a full tank of fuel. So this car, it's 250 miles in the tank.
Yeah.
Even if it's a car with half of that, still 100 plus miles in the tank, that covers most people most of the time.
So it's literally just changing your mindset. So rather than leaving your tank quarter full, just every night come home, top it up.
Every morning you're leaving home with a full tank of fuel.
And batteries it's very capable. They don't depreciate.
No, I mean this car, I suppose that the important point is that battery capacity and therefore range varies a little bit with temperature. So in the summer, when it's warmer, the car will have a greater range than in the winter. This car, at best, first year I had it best 299 miles of range in the tank one summer morning.
Yeah.
Worst case 244, I think it was. So it's quite a big range difference. Then you go on a year, so having done 30,000 miles in a year, that battery, the best day the following summer, 296 rather than 299.
Oh,
So it had lost 3
very-
miles of range, which is negligible.
Yeah.
So I don't see this as a concern. No.
And does it depend how you drive it as well? So if you're driving very fast,
Oh yeah.
and
Of course.
the
I mean,
torque comes in, are
any
you-
vehicle. If you cane your petrol, you take a lot
the
more
same-
power. Yeah, a
it's
lot
the
more
same
fuel.
thing.
Yeah,
So you
definitely.
just have to monitor how you drive.
Yes, and
to
I think
get best out of it.
can I just go back to the range anxiety point, and having spoken about the fact that you charge up at home and always leave it with a full tank. It's also worth considering that if you do have to stop to fill up with and put a little more fuel in when you're travelling, you tend to think very differently. You don't think, oh, I need to fill the car up to full. So you don't think, oh, I've got to sit here and wait for 4 hours, because you get as much as you need to get home, and then you know when you're at home you're going to be charging at a much cheaper rate.
Yeah.
So it is, as you said, it's a very different way of thinking, and once you get into it, it's absolutely fine.
What incentives are there for people? Are there government grants available for electric cars themselves, but also chargers as well?
Yes, absolutely. Both in the home and in the workplace, there are grants offered. The home grant is £350 from the cost of the installation of a charger. There's quite a lot of caveats to it. It has to be tied to either the ownership or the use of a vehicle. In the workplace, it's very different, and that's probably the really interesting one, because the government is trying to encourage the change to electric vehicles, and they see employers as being a key part of that. And
Right.
so the grant is there whether you have an electric vehicle in the business or not. The idea being that you're encouraging staff to be able to make the switch to an electric vehicle, but in the knowledge that they can charge easily at work.
Yes.
That's really important. There's more than that. I think there's no benefit in kind tax on the fuel which is taken at work. So if for example, Fran, if you were charging a car here, yeah, you wouldn't be taxed on the benefit of the fuel you're taking.
So if Credo were to get an electric charging point here, which we are hoping to do in the next few months, what advice would you give us?
Well, I would start by saying we need to find out what it's going to cost you. We need to talk through the options. I tend to start normally when I'm going through this discussion with someone. I send them a document which just outlines the questions you need to ask. How big a chargers do you want? What's your size of your power supply on site? You have to bear in mind these chargers can take a lot of power. So if you put a large number of chargers onto a site with a small power supply, you can have problems if you don't plan it carefully.
Right.
That said, it's easily overcome. It's just about knowing what you're dealing with at the start. You need to then consider points such as access control. So here, for example, are you on a site where anyone could turn up and plug their car in? So you want to make sure that at night you don't have local taxi driver coming and parking his car and leaving it here, for example.
Yes.
Or just anyone taking advantage of it.
So there are a lot of factors to
So you
consider,
put that
which you would.
Yeah, simple
help
access
us with.
control. It can be done through an app on your phone, an RFID card, or you can have something
yeah.
as simple as the system is on a time switch that turns off at night.
Yeah.
But these are things you need to consider. It's just really, when you get those in place, then you can go through the numbers, you can ensure you've got the grant, you can confirm eligibility for the grant before you even start. And that's a really,
fantastic.
I have to say, for a government scheme, a workplace charging scheme is really, it's well put together, and from your point of view, if you're looking at it here, you can confirm your eligibility for the grant in 5 minutes. Very simple. And once you know that, you know your numbers, so it's easy for you to make decisions.
And we would then get a full report on what would be suitable for us here.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't get so much a full report, but you would say, your application would say, I think I need to have, say, four sockets here. Put the application in, and by return of email, you would get a voucher code telling you that you're eligible.
Okay.
You then give that to me or whichever installer you'd like to do the job, and the installer would know that the invoice would come less the value of the grant.
Sure.
And so it's a good system. It's an easy system to work, and it's there just to encourage employers to make it easier for their staff. I think there's another point on it that we talked a little bit about. Home chargers and work chargers. Now, in the home, of course, some people can't charge their car at home because they don't have off-street parking.
Yeah,
You
that's a
can't
good point.
run cables
Yeah.
across pavements and so on. And there's a lot of situations where people live in flats in different places or terrace houses where there is no off-street parking. In that sort of situation, workplace charging actually has a really important role to play.
Yes.
And so it's definitely putting chargers in the workplace is really encouraging.
What sort of projects have you been involved in, like some big projects that you can talk to us about?
Yeah, we've done, I mean, obviously domestic chargers. When I started, it was very much all domestic chargers. Now we're doing a lot more local authority work, councils, which has been really very interesting.
So the councils have really, have they got incentives of their own?
Yes, oh yes. Councils are pushing things forward really quickly at the moment. I think there's some big incentives to make it easier for people to have an electric vehicle. You've got to remember, in 2035 there's going to be no more manufacture of petrol and diesel engines and combustion engines. Okay, it'll take a long time thereafter for it to work through, but the infrastructure needs to be in place.
Yes.
And it's more than just getting the chargers there. A lot of it is about ensuring the supply is in place so there's enough electricity in the right places. So there's some big challenges ahead, but do you know what? They're all going to be okay.
It's definitely more accessible to companies now than it was before, with the government incentives, and now also with finance coming into it as well. We can actually then make it more affordable for these companies to switch quicker than perhaps that they thought they could.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the finance is there. The other thing which is happening is, as with all technologies, is the cost of the equipment is coming down.
Right.
Technology, the sophistication, the functions of these chargers are all improving all the time, and the costs are reducing as well.
Oh, that's good to know.
So it's a good time for getting into it, that's for certain.
I drove my first electric car a few months ago, and I know that I was nervous about driving an electric car for the first time, not knowing what it's all about. And from now, I am going to get my first electric car this year. So what other advice can you give to people that haven't driven an electric car before? What would you say to them today?
I talk to people every day, every week about electric cars. For me, the process of having a car charger installed, which is what I'm involved in, doesn't start with them deciding to put the car chargers in. It always starts with the car.
Yeah.
And I think that there's still a lot of unknowns about electric vehicles. So many people have never driven one. And it might sound really silly, and it's going away from all the talk about numbers and the environment, important though they be, and the environment I think is a huge one, but the number one, get someone to test drive a car. And I just always say to people, go and test drive one. I don't care what it is, it doesn't matter what end of the scale, whether it's the Jaguar or Tesla at one end or the Mini at the other. Go and test drive a car, and I challenge you not to get out of the car with a huge smile on your face, because you will love it.
Yeah.
That's
That's
my
exactly
advice. That's
how
my
I
advice.
felt. Yeah, exactly how I felt, and it gives you the bug to then you can work out all the other stuff later, which seems to be very, very simple. Well, thank you, Richard, for talking through some of those points today. It's been really informative.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.